30 years from now, people may still ask the same question. What would have happened if Barry Mitchell had stayed with Queen? But perhaps that is the wrong question. The real story is not that Barry Mitchell missed his chance to become part of one of the biggest rock bands in history. The real story is that he was there before the history was written, before the stadiums, before the platinum records, before Bohemian Rhapsody, before Queen became a name that would outlive generations. Barry Mitchell, one of Queen's earliest bass players, has died, with the news confirmed in August 2026 by the band's official archivist, Greg Brooks. Mitchell played with the group during its formative period, from 1970 into early 1971, performing alongside Freddie Mercury, Brian May and Roger Taylor before John Deacon became Queen's long-term bassist. The exact cause of Mitchell's death has not been publicly disclosed. Reports indicate that he was 76 years old and that he is survived by 2 daughters. And that makes Barry Mitchell's death more than just another sad headline in the world of classic rock. It is the closing of another door into the version of Queen that almost nobody got to see. Let's be honest, Barry Mitchell will never be remembered by the general public in the same way as Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor or John Deacon. That's simply reality. He wasn't on the classic albums. He wasn't part of the lineup that conquered the world. His name isn't printed across the same legendary photographs that millions of fans recognize instantly. But I think there is something strangely unfair about the way rock history treats musicians like Barry Mitchell. History tends to remember the people standing at the finish line. It often forgets the people who helped build the road. Mitchell joined Queen as the band's second bassist, replacing Mike Groves during a period when the group was still trying to figure out exactly what it wanted to become. He played 13 concerts with Freddie, Brian, and Roger between August 1970 and January 1971. 13 gigs may sound insignificant when compared with Queen's later career, but these weren't just random shows. These were performances from the moment Queen was becoming Queen. Imagine being in a room with Freddie Mercury before the world knew who Freddie Mercury was. Imagine hearing Brian May's guitar before stadium audiences knew every note. Imagine watching Roger Taylor develop the energy that would eventually help turn Queen into one of the greatest live bands in rock history. Barry Mitchell experienced that reality firsthand. And yet, incredibly, he walked away. Years later, Mitchell spoke candidly about why his time with Queen ended. He joked that he had been fired because the others thought he was useless, but he also gave a much more revealing explanation. He admitted that he simply wasn't enthusiastic enough about the musical direction the group was taking. He didn't see the potential. At the time, Queen was not yet the legendary institution we know today, and Mitchell was honest enough to admit that he couldn't see what the future had in store. That admission may be the most fascinating part of Barry Mitchell's entire story. Because how many people have looked back at a missed opportunity and pretended they knew better? Barry Mitchell didn't. He could have spent decades inventing a heroic story about being pushed out of the band. He could have claimed that Queen stole his destiny. He could have presented himself as the forgotten bassist who should have been famous. Instead, he basically said, "I didn't believe in it." And in my opinion, that honesty deserves respect. The uncomfortable truth is that nobody has a crystal ball. We now look at Queen's early years knowing exactly what happened next. We know about A Night at the Opera. We know about Bohemian Rhapsody. We know about Live Aid. We know Freddie Mercury would become one of the most iconic performers in music history. But Barry Mitchell didn't know any of that. To him, Queen was just a young band trying to find its identity. That is the tragedy, and perhaps the beauty, of his story. He stood at the entrance to one of the greatest success stories in rock history and chose a different path because, at that particular moment, it felt right to him. After Mitchell left, Queen continued experimenting with bass players. Doug Bogie briefly stepped in before John Deacon joined in 1971 and became the bassist associated with Queen's classic lineup. Mitchell, meanwhile, continued his own musical journey, including work connected with Crushed Butler and the group later known as Tiger. Later reports also connect him with Jane Radio during his return to music. And this is another part of his legacy that shouldn't be ignored. Barry Mitchell wasn't simply the guy who left Queen. That description is too convenient. His musical career extended beyond those 6 months. Crushed Butler, in particular, occupies an interesting place in British rock history, with the band often associated with the raw, aggressive sound that anticipated elements of punk. So while Queen became polished, theatrical, and globally enormous, Mitchell's musical story also touched a rougher and more rebellious side of British rock. Some reports also credit Mitchell with developing early bass parts for songs including Liar and Son and Daughter, two tracks that would later appear on Queen's debut album. The precise extent of his contribution should be treated carefully, but the reports reinforce an important point. Mitchell was around while material associated with early Queen was still taking shape. That matters. Rock bands don't suddenly appear fully formed. There are rehearsals nobody remembers, small concerts nobody filmed, arguments, experiments, rejected songs, changing lineups, and musicians who come close to becoming permanent members. The version of history fans celebrate is usually the final product. Barry Mitchell belonged to the unfinished version. An unfinished history can be just as important. As for the cause of death, that remains unknown publicly. As of the latest reports, no official cause has been announced. In a time when celebrity deaths can quickly become surrounded by rumors and speculation, it is important not to invent an explanation simply because people want answers. Right now, the confirmed fact is that Barry Mitchell has died. The specific medical cause has not been publicly disclosed. The same restraint is necessary when discussing his private and romantic life. Unlike many rock musicians of his era, Barry Mitchell did not spend decades turning his relationships into public entertainment. There is very little widely documented information about a wife, romantic partners, or the detailed history of his love life. What has been reported publicly is that he is survived by 2 daughters. Beyond that, much of his family life appears to have remained private. And frankly, I think that privacy should be respected. There is a strange habit in celebrity coverage where people assume that every musician's life must contain a dramatic marriage, a famous divorce, a scandalous affair, or some hidden romantic disaster. Sometimes there simply isn't a public story to tell. Barry Mitchell's story was different. His connection to Queen was the part of his life that became public history. His family was his own. But perhaps the most moving part of the reaction to his death has come from people who actually knew him. Tributes have described him as a genuinely lovely person, a friend, and someone who had time for fans. He attended Queen conventions, shared stories, and gave audiences a rare window into the band's earliest days. Greg Brooks specifically praised the fascinating stories and insights Mitchell provided about that period. That, to me, says something important about how Barry Mitchell handled the strange position he occupied in rock history. He could have been bitter. Just think about it. You leave a band before it becomes legendary. Someone else takes your place. The replacement becomes part of one of the most famous lineups in history. Decades pass, and millions of people celebrate the band you once played in while barely knowing your name. That could make anyone resentful. But Barry Mitchell apparently remained willing to talk about those years. He shared the stories. He helped fans understand what the band was like before fame changed everything. That is a different kind of achievement. Not every musician needs to have a #1 album to leave a mark. Sometimes your importance is historical. Sometimes you were there at the beginning. Sometimes you carried a piece of a story that nobody else can tell. Barry Mitchell played only 13 gigs with Queen, but those 13 gigs happened before the world arrived. He knew Queen when success was uncertain. He knew Freddie Mercury before immortality. He saw Brian May and Roger Taylor before they became rock legends. And he left before anyone could know what they were going to become. That's why I don't think Barry Mitchell's story should be reduced to a simple headline saying, "Former Queen bassist dies." Yes, he was a former Queen bassist. But he was also a witness to one of the most extraordinary beginnings in rock history. His greatest achievement may not have been staying until the end. It may have been being part of the beginning, and later having the honesty to admit that he had no idea where that beginning would lead. Barry Mitchell's death reminds us that rock history is filled with people whose names appear only briefly in the official story. But without those people, the story itself might have unfolded differently. The famous lineup is what the world remembers. The early musicians are what make the legend feel human. Barry Mitchell was one of those musicians. And now, another voice from the earliest chapter of Queen has fallen silent. He will not be remembered for performing at Live Aid. He will not be remembered for playing bass on Queen's biggest albums. He will not be remembered as one of the permanent members of the classic lineup. But he will always have something that cannot be taken away. Barry Mitchell was there before Queen became Queen. And for anyone who truly loves the history of rock and roll, that is a legacy worth remembering.